Evening. Welcome to House Groups. We are continuing tonight in our series on what the Bible teaches about gender and sexuality. Tonight we're talking about the importance of identity. And your identity is your sense of self, of who you are. It's where you get your sense of worth from. It's what makes you valuable. And we talked about how today people are taught to find their identity from within and from their feelings or desires, and increasingly so from their sexual desires. But this is not a good place to find your identity because your feelings are broken. They constantly change and they're heavily influenced by the culture. Instead of finding our identity from within, we should find it from above, from Christ, and from the truth that He makes us a new creation. He forgives us. He brings us into His family. And that becomes our true identity. It's primary in all things. As author Rosaria Butterfield says, you can't have union with Christ if you've made an identity out of anything else. Union with Christ demands that Christ has what we would say is exclusive claims on His redeemed people. Indeed, you're actually doing yourself harm if you insist on holding on to two forms of self-representation, which is why someone shouldn't identify as a gay Christian or as a trans Christian, as I tend to hear people calling themselves more and more. As we covered the first 2 weeks, acting on or approving of those desires would not be in accordance with God's will. And so we would never want to identify ourselves by something that isn't pleasing to God, just as you wouldn't identify yourself as a jealous Christian or as a greedy Christian. I think Ephesians 4 is really helpful here. And this is great because we're going to be going back into Ephesians, chapter 4, in fact, when this series is done in a couple weeks. Paul writes this, Ephesians 4:17 through 24. He says, "So I tell you this, and insist on it in the Lord, that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do, in the futility of their thinking. They are darkened in their understanding and separated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to the hardening of their hearts. Having lost all sensitivity, they have given themselves over to sensuality so as to indulge in every kind of impurity, and they're full of greed." Okay, so far this, even 2,000 years later, this is a very good description of how people live out their identities apart from Christ. They're pursuing their identity through sensuality. Same old story. As the poet Bon Jovi once said, "It's all the same, only the names will change." Okay, let's keep reading now. It says, "That, however, is not the way of life you learned when you heard about Christ and you were taught in Him in accordance with the truth that is in Jesus. You were taught, with regard to your former way of life, to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness." And so as Christ followers, we are to put on the new self, to stay focused on our new identity, to trust that God is making us new, to trust in His ways and not the desires of our flesh, and to remember that we were created to live in holiness, to live like our Father in heaven, because we are a part of His family now, and that is our identity. Amen.